living in Japan is extremely comfortable. The needs of foreigners and Japanese are much different. If you're not evolving, you're not changing who you are as a manager, you can't make it to the next stage. Like doubling and tripling in size like every year. I think that level of growth, it's not natural. If we had started the company in 2010, I think it would have failed.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby and sitting here today with Tyson. Thank you for coming.
Hey, glad to be on the show today.
Tyson, you flew in all the way from Hokkaido, where you live 2 hours north of Sapporo in a town called Asahikawa.
Yes.
And this is where you're based and your company, your latest venture, scaling your company, where you help companies enter the Japanese market, where you assist companies with marketing. But it's not all you've done. This is actually like your third venture in Japan. And we want to talk about all of this. But maybe tell us a little bit about what brought you to Japan.
Excellent. So I'm actually half Okinawan. So when people ask Okinawa, it's like, so in Hawaii, we say, instead of saying we're Japanese, we actually say we're Okinawan.
Okay. So you kind of specifically...
It's a distinguish. It's, so I'm half Okinawan, and that was the main reason for coming to Japan. I wanted to, explore my roots. And it's been almost 20 years now, even though the plan was initially 2 years.
So you were back home in Hawaii and you were like, okay, I'm going to Japan for 2 years, see what happens. Did you have a specific plan of what you wanted to do back then?
So maybe learn a little bit of Japanese, save some money, then go to graduate school.
Okay.
Which never ended up happening.
But now you're here many years later. What was the thing that kind of kept you in Japan, where you decided to drop the grad school plans and I'm just staying here, I'm going to keep doing this?
Yeah, for me, I feel that living in Japan is extremely comfortable. And what I mean by that is just the normal things like food, transportation, housing. But for me, more important than that, it's, not having people tell me that my beliefs are wrong.
Interesting.
Or people who are very dogmatic. I've found that people just, you have your thoughts, I have my thoughts. Let's just focus on the things that are fun.
So that was like a key difference from back in the US, where maybe there's more active discussions on pretty much everything someone may have an opinion on.
Yeah, and I think when I first came to Japan, I didn't have as much confidence. I would say I was a people pleaser. So let's say my emotions would kind of get taken by others. But I think here I've been able to kind of separate myself from other people, develop a confidence, understand who I am now. And if I were ever to go back, I think I would thrive. But that was my initial reason for staying here in the beginning.
What was a moment for you that, or maybe not a moment, but the past that got you into entrepreneurship when you started your first venture here in Japan?
It's my grandfather had his own store, so I think there's probably something there. But I worked in a large corporation that had about 3,000 employees.
Okay, that's pretty big.
The department I was in had around 500 to 600 employees. And I was in charge of the most important client in Japan. And the main reason I got into entrepreneurship was I was managing 150 full-time teachers. So I've seen everything that can happen in life pretty much. But there's a lot of things that I had control over. I did everything I could, but we were working with the government. And so a lot of things I didn't have control over. So without going to too much details, did a lot of things to make the employee experience great. But ultimately, there's things we couldn't control because we're serving the government. Mm-hmm. And so I thought in the education space. So I thought, there's not much more I could do here that wouldn't involve a lot of political battles or trying to convince a lot of people over years and years. And I was like, why not just go separate and let's say do something education related where I have the control. I can decide the curriculum, the style, the customers, the teachers, pricing. And so that was my initial reason for leaving my corporate job as an assistant HR manager trainer and into the entrepreneurship realm.
So you were working in a large corporation that was in the education field.
That is correct.
Was it like English language education or
Yes.
just general?
And so, I mean, I can say the name. It was a company called Interact.
Okay.
And I think it's the second biggest employer of English teachers in Japan with 3,000. I think the national government is the most with like 4,000 or 5,000.
And so from there you started, was it Japan Switch or OneCoin English first?
First, it started as OneCoin English.
So can you tell us a little bit about OneCoin English and kind of how you built this? What was the concept behind it?
It was pretty serendipitous, but what happened was I quit my job. I had no job lined up. Went traveling to, I think, Cambodia, I think Thailand, and I think Indonesia for about 3 or 5 weeks. Came back and got a message from one of my former employees who, I helped him, I championed him to remain in the company for a long time. Let's just put it on that. He was on a PIP, but I saved him and he more than repaid my kindness. But he introduced me to 2 Japanese guys. They're like, we want to create an English language school chain. We want to go national. And we're looking for someone who can really handle just the foreigner side. And for me, it's kind of interesting because the 2 partners, both of them, had already created multi-million-dollar businesses.
Wow.
And so I'll be the one new partner who's entering entrepreneurship. And at the time, I was considering getting an MBA, but I thought compared to getting an MBA, learning for 2 people, one who had, I think he created 3 by the time we created our company. It's like, well, this is the best education I could ever get. One thing I forgot to mention is when I left my corporate job, I had about 2 to 3 years of living expenses saved just so I could venture something, explore. So I was ready for it.
So you kind of left prepared and with this desire to maybe approach the education industry in Japan in a different way. So this is kind of where OneCoin English came in.
That is correct. And luckily, they found me before I started something else. So I think it was just all these random things that just kind of the timeline just matched.
When looking back at the situation of English language education back then, and maybe today as well, if you're still in contact with this industry, what were some of the main challenges that you were trying to find solutions for?
In our case, it was the reason we created OneCoin English was if someone was working part-time or someone's doing shift work or let's say entry-level work, they probably wouldn't be able to afford English lessons. And so we thought, how can we make it so that anyone can afford it? So that was kind of the first goal. And so that was the real reason why we created it. So that was one thing. Back then, there wasn't a proliferation of online lessons. Also, I think the online setup, there was Zoom wasn't as ubiquitous. So the technology really wasn't there in, I think 2014. So I think it's that combination, not having any players. And I think the third one is, I think we want to come up, or at least in my case, I kind of want to come up with a system where the traditional method for a school is I have this big goal. It's okay, you need to come as much as you can. But I think the prices they're charging, I think for a person to come twice a week, I think they're paying 400,000 yen.
Wow. So if you build your own school and just have the traditional way.
Oh no, for the students.
For the students to come twice a week.
Twice a week. And I think the cheapest plan was probably around 100,000 to like, I think it was around like 150,000, I think. But with our school, I think the price for once a week was, I think they could attend for a whole year for maybe like 50, 60,000 yen. So like, one third the price.
So basically, OneCoin English was trying to make English education more accessible by providing it online and more affordable by also having more flexible prices as to
yes.
what was available back then.
That
and
is
that
correct.
company was pretty successful, right? You scaled it up and you ended up having dozens of employees, full-time and part-time. What was it like managing a company that kind of grew and expanded nationwide?
So I'd say it was insane. is the best way I could put it. It's we had another serendipitous timing, but I think around 2014, I can't remember when, they jacked up the sales tax from 4 to 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And so like if we had started the company in 2010, I think it would have failed because people weren't as price conscious, but because they raised the sales tax, people were very price conscious. And so as a result of that, the timing was just perfect. But essentially, we just probably similar to Zen Group. It's like doubling and tripling in size like every year. And so I think pre-COVID, from 2014 to 2000, I think we scaled from I guess like 4 or 5 of us to around, I think it was around like 40 or 50 full-time staff and 150 plus part-time staff in a space of 6 years. And that was just insane, just let's say doubling in staff. Also, it's I think a lot of people don't have experience with that type of rapid growth. But essentially, if you're not evolving, you're not changing who you are as a manager, leader, your skills like every 3 to 6 months, like you can't make it to the next stage. So that's why I mentioned it was insane, because I think that level of growth, it's not natural. I think it's more of like a modern invention. But so yeah, I thought that was a crazy challenge. Luckily, I was able to survive. A lot of people, like usually they can't scale.
And the company just kind of implodes.
Or you just have to replace these people, your brothers and sisters who you fought in war with, building at the beginning. And the challenge is the people who are great at the beginning might not necessarily be the best people for the growth stage or the big expansion stage.
Interesting. So you kind of have to adapt and change, and maybe also change some of the partners you work with.
It's at first, I think if you're a first-time founder, you kind of have that feeling like it's my brother and sister, so we want to take them together. That's the feeling I had. But after doing it once, it's right now it's very clear in my brain. So like when, at least for my company, I've told some members, like, I think you're a very good growth stage member, but I'm not sure if you can survive the expansion stage. Just the way you speak, sometimes the excuses, it's, that won't fly at the next stage.
Can you give some examples of kind of what, in your experience, defines a company in the early stage as opposed to growth stage? Like, how does management and how do the processes change?
Yeah, I'll say in the early stage, I think the key point is just figuring out that what you have matches what people want to buy. And so in our case, the challenge we had in the beginning was when people heard OneCoin English, they were like, okay, that must be crap. So people's initial impressions was OneCoin English lesson equals crap. So in our case, we really had to spend a lot of time on the marketing, the presentation, like the interior is very beautiful, or it's not, I won't say very beautiful, it's beautiful enough. And let's say the lessons are good. It's people are wearing suits or they're wearing professional attire. So there's nothing strange here. So we had to spend a lot of effort kind of educating people that although it's really cheap. And for other businesses though, it's the same too. You have to just talk to a lot of customers and see if people are willing to spend money to fund your idea or your product or service. And I think if you can get enough traction there, maybe you make like, let's say $10,000 a month, or let's say 1 million yen, or let's say 3 million yen, 5 million yen. And it's like, okay, we've probably got enough customers that this is an idea that has some possibility here. And at that stage, that's when, let's say, you can really spend more on growth. So maybe spending more money on sales, marketing. But in that beginning, that growth stage, it's really the founders of the company dealing with customers themselves and really make sure this product or service is really what people want. And you get them how to communicate that message to other people. Then once you really get that message and the product, that's when you can kind of bring in other people and say, this is what we do. I'm going to let you take it from here. But a lot of companies fail when they don't know exactly their core identity and they hire people. Then these people come in with their own beliefs, their own thoughts, past experiences. And then the founders themselves might not know the right path. And then it's kind of hard, like where the person says like, well, you gets the impression where the founders don't know what they're doing. So I have to come up with an idea. And from the founders end, they don't know what the right idea is. So they can't give this person feedback. And I think that just creates a lot of friction and unnecessary trying to figure things out. So I think the smoother path is for the founders to figure it out themselves and then get the people to help accelerate it.
That's an interesting take. What I'm curious now is, the theory here sounds like it could be done anywhere in the world and it would be the same. But you've achieved this here in Japan. Did you feel or experience anything specific that you perceived as a challenge specifically relevant to Japan, whether it's dealing with the customers and how you have to present and maybe market the idea of OneCoin English to a Japanese customer base that was unexpected?
Yeah, or I would say is unexpected in the sense that it was underestimated, I think is the better term for it. Anyone creating their company for the first time, they are definitely going to underestimate how hard it is to get sales. And so I'll say that was probably the hardest part. I already talked about the OneCoin English case where people didn't trust us. So we had to, I would say it took us longer because we had to spend so much time on the interior, on the marketing, the website, that at first we figured, well, it's OneCoin, and the teachers are professional. Like I manage one of the biggest, I manage teachers for the biggest education board in Japan. That should be enough.
So in your mind, it was clear. OneCoin English means it's like a good kind of price. Yeah, it's affordable, and we are professionals. Hence, you should trust us. Yeah, exactly. But the customers didn't see it this way.
Like we had the pedigree, and so like people should just be flocking in the door. Like there's no reason to say no, but it turns out because of their Japanese people, let's say they're a bit doubtful. It took a lot of effort on our end to establish that trust. And once we got that trust, I think things just skyrocketed from there. And it's also like, I think is able to skyrocket from there just because once something is kind of proven in Japan, or once it's established per se, it's really easy to get people in the door. And what I mean by established was we were on national TV probably like 4, 5, 6 times already. And so like when we have on our website, they were on Matsuko Kaigi. They're on Getsuyo no Yokashi, or these are national level programs, or Chika-chan ni shikareru. And like these are programs seen by like more than 5 million people. And so like after we had that type of credibility, it was just really easy to get people into it. We were established per se, but getting to the point of being established, that was it's like fighting gravity.
The early stages are very difficult, but once you get recognition from especially public media, which maybe is seen as very trustworthy here in Japan, suddenly it works. What about the scaling side of the company in terms of management? So you mentioned the different stages and the challenges of transitioning from one to the other. You were in an international company, right? You had foreign employees, but also Japanese co-founders. How did you see Japanese, or maybe just generally speaking, management practices adapt to this environment in a Japanese context?
Gotcha. So I do have experience working in Japanese, even though we were managing foreign English teachers. Our branch manager is Japanese. The sales team is Japanese. The customer, or let's say the schedulers are Japanese. So outside of our office in downtown Yokohama, there's maybe 30 people in our office. There's maybe 5 foreigners. Outside of that office is pretty much 100% foreigners. But so I do have that kind of corporate experience. But I was going from managing a team to manage, let's say I had a team of, let's say, head teachers, managers who would manage the teachers. So I was 2 degrees separated. Mm-hmm. So I think the first challenges with management was I've never had to talk to teachers for so much in my life. So like first, learning to relate more with teachers as opposed to, let's say, managing by proxy, like 2 stages away. So in that one, it involved a lot of eating lunch together. So I'll treat them for lunch, just talk to them like, what are the challenges you're having? What students are challenging? How about talking to Japanese staff? For me, I think it was really, at that first stage, is just really understand what people are going through. And that was also very useful for me because that also helped me develop the structure of the company. Meaning where even though I worked for an education company before, it was more, these are people in the office, there are teachers in the ground, as opposed to we're all working in one location. So I had to kind of reinvent my management style as well, from managing by proxy to directly. So that was the first stage, is that one. I'll talk about the second stage, then I'll get to the Japanese side. The second stage was, now that we have maybe 15 teachers, it's kind of getting to the point that I don't have the capacity to know 15 people intimately, deeply, know their concerns, personal life challenges, to really help them. Because for foreigners, when they first come to Japan, especially if they're in their early 20s, there's just so much going on in their personal end. And so, just kind of helping them navigate. So in a way, I was the manager / big brother.
Because, they need assistance, and how do you deal with this thing at the Shiakusho, and how do you handle this paperwork, and where can I find this in Tokyo or Yokohama? And, a lot of questions.
Yeah, tons. And luckily, I've been in Japan for about 8 to 10 years by then. My first company with 150 full-time employees. I've seen I can't say a lot of things on camera, but I've seen pretty much everything that can happen to a person in Japan.
From highs to lows.
Yes, from the best. And so that kind of gave me a good experience to help them as well. Because whatever they've experienced, I've seen it 5-10 times. And it's in my mind, because I've done HR, and we did have 600 employees in that branch, or 500 or 600. When I listen to people talk, I can actually project this is what you're going to go through, and I can actually write it down on paper. This is the stages you're going to go in life here, just because I've seen it 5 times already, and it's.
But you can only do that with so many people at a time, right? So when your team exceeds this magic number of 15, suddenly you're unable to cater to everyone's needs.
Yeah, then you need help, and so that's when I brought in the first, let's say, kind of head teacher, trained them. Like in the previous experience, I had 13 head teachers, so that part was easy for me because that's what I already did. But that stage, if I had to, for the listeners, it's how can I won't be able to influence people directly. I have to influence by proxy now. But the key there is for the person who's influencing on my behalf or helping others, managing, training, on my behalf, they have to really understand like my thinking, the culture I want, how I would handle this types of situations. So with that initial team who did handle that for me, it's then taking them out to lunch often, talking about my philosophy. What are the challenges you're having? What are the challenges that people are bringing to you? This is how I would handle it. So that's kind of how you make it to, let's say, level 3, where there's yourself, there's your manager, and the people they're managing.
So you build your layers, you build your structure.
Yes. And it's a lot of effort making sure they get it. And it takes 2 years.
And you were mentioning that then there came this kind of Japanese side to it. How did that kind of influence the whole management structure?
Yeah, the Japanese side, that made it a lot more complicated because the needs of foreigners and Japanese are much different. If I had to give one example, Japanese people would love to have shakai hoken. Shakai hoken, it's where the company pays 50%, you pay 50% of the health insurance and pension. And sorry, the company pays, you pay 50%, they pay 50%. But basically, you're doubling your pension amount through shakai hoken. But from a foreigner's point of view, like, let's say, taking that much for pension, like 40,000 yen a month for pension, it's like, oh my God, like, I'm not going to see this money. Like, I don't want it. And so that was kind of the one challenge where Japanese people want something, foreigners don't want something.
Probably also depends on the foreign background, right? Because I think you're referring to specifically maybe American background where the system is as such, like you plan for your own, and some companies may offer like 401k, but I think in Europe it will be quite similar to the Japanese system where you have a contribution from the company as well. And
I think there's that, or some country, like, or at least in our company, we had staff members from 30 or 40 different countries. Some countries might not actually have an agreement with Japan.
So you can't get your pension if you ever leave Japan.
You never get in the full amount. If your country has an agreement, you could, let's say, deliver the full amount. Otherwise, you have to take a penalty. That's one example. Another challenge is for foreigners to go back to their home country. That's probably essentially like 1 to 2 days of travel. So it's essentially around 3 days of travel just to go there. And in Japan, where the standard vacation is, like maybe 7 to 10 days, that doesn't leave a lot of time for foreigners. So like, how can we have a system that's kind of fair for that? One other unique one, what we ended up doing is we did want to encourage Japanese staff to go overseas, since we are an education company for English. So if our employees have never been out of Japan, let's say that's not in accordance with our mission. So we provided an allotment for them. But for foreign staff, we made one to travel in Japan of the same amount of money. So if you travel somewhere in Japan, and that was kind of interesting too, because it encouraged foreign staff to go to places they normally wouldn't have gone to because of the cost. Like, am I going to go all the way to like Kagoshima? Just as like most foreigners probably wouldn't go there, residents.
Yeah, the very south of Kyushu Island.
But if your airplane is fully covered and I think maybe a little bit of the hotel, why not check it out? But so that was more just kind of the benefit sides. Like the tricky part is like having 2 systems that work for both sides was a bit challenging.
And eventually you kind of worked on this, improved, adapted, and the company grew. But you decided to then start more ventures and start more projects. And your latest one is scaling your company. So you now help companies that are abroad with their market entry. Can you explain a little bit more what you do with your latest project?
Sure. And I'll give just maybe like 1 or 2 minutes on Japan Switch. But I was HR director for OneCoin English, in charge of, curriculum, training, managing, and hiring teachers. And I would say we've probably hired over 1,000 teachers by now, without using a job board. That's one of my proud, I've never used a job board, but just through my marketing skills. But after 5 years of doing that, it's like, well, we have 150 teachers now. In my previous company, we had 500. It's not that exciting for me because I've already done this.
You've done it before.
So kind of the opportunity arose where my co-founder is like, we're thinking about creating a Japanese, like one of my friends reached out and she's like, she wants to collaborate and create a Japanese language school. What do you think about that? And in my case, I was like, actually, that's really interesting because I'm bored of the HR side. And I did really well in recruitment. I didn't know I was using marketing tactics at the time. It's just, and one thing I do have to add is in my previous company, when I came in, let's say surveyed, I think 150 teachers, and the satisfaction towards the company was 2 out of 5.
Okay.
After 1.5 years, it was 3.8 out of 5. But that really helped with me becoming a very good marketer because, let's say, changing the culture of a company and how you communicate it to 150 staff members. And the CEO, my co-founder CEO, also said like, I think you might have this talent for marketing. I was like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. So I wanted to learn finance, like accounting, finance. And I also wanted to learn the marketing side. And I also wanted to have kind of experience being CEO because, as mentioned, my previous company, I founded it with 2 people who were already successful CEOs.
So you kind of had the main pilot there and you were like the co-pilot learning how to do this thing.
So like I was the corporate experience. So like, so that was really good to learn, scaled Japan Switch, scaled it to pretty solid revenue as we were a morning only, beginner only, no JLPT, no writing, no business Japanese school, and we're able to scale it pretty big. So like I've been in all these unique situations where, let's say, I didn't have really much advantages, but I think that has helped me become extremely creative being in such tight situations. But long story short, I think there's 2, Japan Switch is Ueno, Shinjuku online, and I think they're opening in Kichijoji, I think next month.
So before starting scaling your company and after leaving OneCoin English, you also started Japan Switch, which is not English focused, but
Japanese focused. And it was a subsidiary of OneCoin English.
Okay, as a subsidiary.
Yeah. Then just happens, my wife supported me for 8 to 10 years for OneCoin English and Japan Switch. She was getting tired of living in Kanto. She's from Hokkaido originally, and she said like, I want to move back home. And I was like, well, you did stay here for 8 to 10 years. So I was like, okay, I'll move to Hokkaido with you. And so that's how scaling your company got started. It was knowing that Hokkaido is so hard to break in that I needed to do something online. And what is something that I could do easily? It's helping companies scale their marketing, or helping them train their middle managers, or helping let's say, especially people who founded the company for the first time. There's just so much they don't know, and they need to level up in so many areas. Staff members are like, you're the CEO, you should know everything. But as a first-time founder, you don't know a lot of those things. And so I thought I can help people who are first-time founders who want to scale their company to like 10 million US revenue. Or they want to go from let's say 10 million yen to maybe 50 million yen. And there's just so many things to learn through trial and error. I was lucky that I had 2 people who've already done it. And who'd also done it multiple times. So I really got to learn from the best. And so I wanted to share that. One was just being in Hokkaido in an isolated city. I wanted to do something that could move quickly. And the second one was, I did think I had a competitive advantage to help foreigners who were in let's say, the same situation as me, but in an earlier stage. And so, yeah, I've been helping companies with their marketing. also like because with Japan Twitch, we've had like Facebook ads with like 1,000 likes with just foreigners in Japan, like 100 shares, 100 comments. Done that many times. Our SEO gets like 60,000 visitors a month,
That's pretty good.
and so it's been pretty successful. And so yeah, just want to help foreigners with that same things as well. And I've now expanded it now that I've been doing it for 3 years, where at first it was more like marketing and kind of like operations, like leveling up the CEO, leveling up the middle managers. And one thing just to add about the middle managers, if the CEO, if it's a first-time founder and they've not worked in corporate and managed a big team, they can't really provide that guidance to the middle manager. And so then you kind of have like two people who are middle manager level in terms of low middle manager level in terms of management skill. And it's kind of like the blind leading the blind.
Mm-hmm.
So I just help them really navigate that when they're both just trying to figure things out.
So I'm curious now that you've established the company 3 years ago. I'm sure you've had quite a few cases and other startups you've been able to assist and so on. What are some of the common challenges you see founders in Japan having?
Yeah, I think probably other guests can talk about more of like, the visa is a headache, bank account is
Yeah, we've talked about this a few times on the show already. It's a recurring challenge to get registered, to get set up and going and have it all ready.
Yeah, outside of that, I think, so most of my clients, they already have a little bit of success. So, they might make like 10, 30, 50 million yen. But in their case, their challenges is more like I've done very well through my sheer personality and dedication to the customer. We've scaled it to this point. But the problem now is other people have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not getting it. Or now we need to do marketing. But I don't know how to do that.
So they do mostly sales and just like B2B, or they sell themselves. But if they want to scale, they need to actually do proper digital marketing.
Like proper systematic digital marketing, where, or at least let's say on the English side, they'll get customers just because they're out there handing flyers. They're making events, and just the sheer personality of the founder makes things work. Or other cases is where they'll just post on Facebook or LinkedIn, where they'll post something and like they'll be in like communities and like other people in the community like them, but how can they do it where they don't have to spend their time like, reaching out to people one-on-one, even if it's a B2C or a B2B case? And how can we get it more just through marketing, where people reach out to you because they've heard of you, because they've seen you somewhere else? And that's kind of what, my appearance here on today too. Mm-hmm. It's, I think you have an audience that maybe don't listen to my podcast, or maybe they haven't heard of me. So this is my way of expanding my audience, so that by the time they do, maybe they see me again in the future. Oh, I heard that guy on, the Unpacking Japan podcast, and he knows what he's talking about. And now the time is right, I'll send him an inquiry. So how to get that kind of how to get oversubscribed is a good, I didn't come up with that term, but oversubscribed, meaning the amount of people who want your services is more than what you can provide, and therefore you have the means to expand your business.
What kind of startups you see as typical in Japan? You've worked a lot in the educational side, and I'm sure there are more coming, but do you notice any trend in the type of startups specifically started by foreigners in Japan?
Yeah, so I think one context, it's I've served for the last 2 years as a resident mentor, resident mentor for 500 Global. 500 Global is probably one of the top startup accelerators in the world. So I think like Reddit, I think GitHub, I think in Japan, Paydi.
Okay.
Paydi and Smart HR were part of the program. But they have like $18 billion valuation companies. So they're one of the top in the world. And every year they have about 10 to 15 companies from overseas enter Japan, and I help them with their product, marketing, and sales. And so one thing I think has changed, I think, especially compared to since I started a company, is there's probably a foreigner who started a business in Japan in pretty much every industry now, like a health tech device or health, or maybe like software system for like pharmacies. I think there's 2 Mongolians doing that. Fintech software. So I think one of the biggest personal finance apps in Japan was started by, I think, Australian guy.
Cool.
So yeah, shout out to him. And so there's, and even Paidy, I think, I'm not sure where he's from, but there's a foreigner on, $1 billion valuation Japanese company.
So any field you can think of, a foreigner has tried to do this in Japan.
And it's probably at least got some decent amount of success now in 2024. So I think that's, I think one thing people don't, there's actually a lot more success cases than you would think.
I'm curious about the 500 that you are a mentor for. And you say about every year they bring 10 startups from overseas into Japan. What do those companies see as their challenge into entering the Japanese market?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is usually getting your first customers. So like the companies that they're bringing in, majority of them already have corporate clients in their home country. Maybe some of them also have Japanese corporations in their home country as clients. But the biggest challenge is getting a Japanese client. And until you get that Japanese client, it's going to take a lot of, let's say, blood, sweat, and tears. Because in Japan, not many companies want to be the first. And I think a good way of putting it is companies don't want to learn on your behalf. They don't want you to learn on their behalf. So they're paying you money and you're just kind of figuring it out and learn things. In Japan, they want a completed product. And that's why crowdfunding is hard to do in Japan, where like, at least in the US, I like these guys or girls and I want to support or women, and I want to support their cause. So I'm going to give them money. But in Japan, crowdfunding is, like Sony, I think Panasonic, they do crowdfunding. It's people want more, let's say, like established things that just work here. And so I think that's the biggest challenge, is getting that first customer, and it just takes so much work. But if you could get 5, 10 of them, things get so much easier. And I find that just foreign companies in general, most of them give up because it's so hard getting that initial traction. But once you establish that initial traction, you're here for 2-3 years, you get a good network, clients. Now, let's say, for a competitor from overseas to take your spot, it's going to take them 2 to 3 years to get set up.
So you've got that advantage now.
Yes, I think a lot of foreigners, they give up too quickly.
It's interesting because earlier when we were talking about OneCoin English, you also said the beginning was really hard, getting your first few clients. And now for companies that are already established overseas and are trying to come to Japan, the challenge is the same. Is there like a recipe on how you can get clients or convince Japanese clients, customers, as you said, who may be reluctant to spending money on something they don't know, on something that they're not familiar with, on something that is not 100% success guarantee? Is there any way to convince them? Have you noticed something that works?
Yeah. So the things, one thing is just having your materials in Japanese. So like if you make software and it's not in Japanese, that's pretty much a deal closer right there. Like, why would a Japanese company use a software that's only in English? There has been exceptions like Slack, Notion, Mira, Jiro. But other than these, maybe Canva. I'm not sure if there's a Japanese Canva. There probably is a Japanese Canva version. But other than these extremely viral software, that everyone in the startup world uses. And I can only think of 4 or 5 cases in Japan. It's your software has to be localized, or your product has to be localized. Other one is your sales deck. It has to be in Japanese. Even if you're dealing with someone who speaks English, their boss might not speak Japanese. The other people in their department don't speak Japanese. So it's everything. It's the shortcut is, as much as possible, it should look like it's a Japanese company.
Do you see that a lot, that actually things are in English, the sales decks are in English, the software is not localized and are brought to Japan and kind of assume that it's going to work as is?
It happens, like, I'm about to shed a tear because it happens so often. It's like, yes, it happens so often where people, they just see Japan as a wealthy country. There's all this money. And so, and I think that's one thing they really don't, I think that's why so many people fail in Japan, is they don't get that Japan is a 5 to 10 year play. And that if you don't see Japan as, like, let's say, depends on the company's size, but let's say 5%, 10%, 20, 30% of your company's annual revenue, it's probably better not to even bother coming. Like, don't waste our time if you're not that serious about it. So I think if the market size that you kind of think it'll take up this much amount of your sales will be Japan-based, then I think it's interesting to consider Japan, because it takes 5 to 10 years. It's all about relationships, network, and trust. And it's not that Japanese companies are very conservative. They're very risk adverse. But so I think a lot of people do reach out for me for shortcuts, and the shortcut is you de-risk the decision for them. If you don't have things in English, that's risky. If your sales staff are not in Japan, that's risky. Let's say, they can't respond. They can only respond during European hours, which is not a good match for Japan. Probably knowing yourself, that's risky for them. So if you create Japanese people don't like risk just because they don't want to lose face. And so the shortcut is, I can go on for like hours of ways of de-risking, but that's the secret. Just de-risk the decision for them.
So it's more than just translating a software and preparing a sales deck in Japanese. It's more about thinking about all the points that would make them want to run away and kind of little by little remove all of them. That's kind of the... I
think that's a great summary. That's a perfect summary.
So the difference between startups, whether they are started here or whether they are kind of imported from overseas that succeed or fail, is planning for the long term, planning for a Japanese audience, and thinking about averting risk.
And it's not my opinion. I've talked to other people who do a similar thing of helping startups enter the Japanese market. A lot of us are at the consensus that if you, I'm just throwing out a number, but if you haven't raised like $5 million or even like several millions, you're just not ready for Japan. Like, they call it like, let's say pre-seed, seed, Series A. Series A means that you have customers, it works, you have corporate clients, you're established, now you're ready to go to the moon. And seed stage is one step earlier, where at least in Japan, you might raise like, let's say 50 million yen or 100 million yen, or let's say $1 million at sometimes the higher end here. Of course, there's cases where there's more, but in that case, seed stage companies, I've seen them try to enter. It's you're wasting your time, you're wasting my time, you're wasting other people's time. And a pre-seed means you just have an idea. You might have a minimal viable product, but if you have the only cases where I think if you have kind of like MVP level or like seed stage where you might have a few customers, might be a good idea, might work, is if the Japan case is so strong that you have to succeed in Japan. And so one of the few cases I've seen or seed stage where like, yeah, this company definitely needs to come to Japan is it's a Korean company where called Solterra 8. So shout out to Jungduk. It's where they provide with drones and robots. It analyzes infrastructure damage.
Oh, we talked to Asa on the show a few months ago who used to do something similar, and now he's kind of expanding as well into building more vertiports and kind of building infrastructure for like drones to move around. But
yeah.
He was doing something like that as well.
Yeah, Asa from Skyscape, I think. Yeah, it does do that. I think his is more focused on drone, but this one they also have like robots where in Japan he would send them into tubes.
Okay.
In very tiny tubes where if this tube collapsed, the people who were in there would, they would perish. And they would analyze the infrastructure data using AI. And in his case, because a lot of the infrastructure built in Japan was made to last like 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. And it was built in the bubble era. So I'll say it's actually more in like the 40 range. So a lot of this infrastructure that was built in the 80s, they're meeting their kind of like lifespan. And so like there are bridges right now that are cracking in Japan. There's all this infrastructure that's really hard to get to. And so, but in Korea's case, I think their bubble is like in 2000 maybe, or like late 1990s maybe. Don't quote me on that. So in his case, 10 years from now in Korea, it's going to be a boom. But right now, Japan really needs it. And so in his case, I think it really makes sense to enter the Japan market because his Japan case is so strong. But from the amount of people who reach out to me, like if I had to think of like the hundreds of companies, maybe like 5% have a compelling Japan case.
So most often they want to come because they see Japan as a wealthy market where they assume they can sell, but the reality is it's not a right product to market fit. But in some cases, even though when it's a very early seed stage of a startup where the product solve a specific problem to prevalent in Japan, like analyzing structure damage because of the many earthquakes we have here, then it may make sense to kind of...
Yeah, and I have to give another example. One of the companies from last year's 500 Global, it was a Taiwanese company that makes line marketing automation. So for example, it could do like slots, it has like games, where you can get customers, they can play games, and they win coupons.
On the messaging app line.
Yeah. And it also, they had this really cool feature where it would send like, line business or send messages to your customers. And based on when they open the line message, it would optimize the best opening time. And like, so in their case, let's say line is huge in Thailand and Taiwan and the other country, Japan. So in their case, it makes perfect sense for them to come to Japan because the case is so strong, and they have succeeded. Like, because I mean, they have like KFC, they have big Japanese brands in Taiwan, so they've pushed through, and I would consider them a success case for Japan.
And to highlight more of those success cases, you also have your podcast, which you briefly mentioned earlier, where you interview foreigners living in Japan, but not only foreigners, that have their startups or work in the startup field and share insights. What are some of the most memorable stories that you have from your interviews?
Cool. And sorry, I want to mention one last point. But for these, although I've kind of like, criticized these companies saying like, they wasted everyone's time. It's so actually because of that, that's one reason I've created a lot of blog content. But also, like, I think previously, like, if you wanted to enter the Japan market, you'd have to, someone who helps with Japan market entry, like, market research. And that's really expensive. So a lot of these companies who want to enter, they don't want to pay for the marketing research. But they want to get into the Japan market. So that's kind of something I'm doing now, where people might just pay me for 1 to 2 hours of consultation. And it's like, well, these are some similar examples. I think you might have a chance to succeed in Japan based on your stage, or it's too early. But let's say probably not good to waste 2 to 3 months, thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. I would say maybe try come again in maybe 6 months, revisit this. So that's one service I've had to offer, because I found that just so many people waste months, maybe years, just because I wouldn't say that they didn't do enough research. There's just not good information on the internet about the Japan market. And so that was one. And so for people who can't afford it, I've created my blog, which I think gets like about 8,000 visitors a month now. Just anything related to business in Japan. We've probably covered that to help them. And but yeah, to answer for my podcast, the Scaling Japan podcast, it's I noticed that most podcasts in Japan, they're really focused on the guest, but I was the first person I think that came on the idea of the focus of the topic. So meaning I would choose a topic that I think was in need, and I would find the guest to meet that topic. So for example, how to do sales to the Japanese government. Other one, how to do influencer marketing in Japan. And so the Scaling Japan podcast would go for like 45 minutes or to 1 hour on just that one topic, just influencer marketing. What do you need to know? E-commerce in Japan, logistics in Japan. And so I think I've done a good job of providing information, detailed information for people who want to enter the Japanese market or already here and want to scale their company. But there might not be good information online, and hiring someone might be too expensive.
So your podcast is more like, again, a support kind of to the blog, a visual, audio support where people can get and find specific information. So if maybe from our conversation today, we have an entrepreneur or company thinking about coming to Japan, and it's like, oh, I'm at this stage, I'm looking for this. Maybe they'll find the answer from one of the conversations with you guys.
I think there's a good chance. There's about 70 episodes. I've interviewed Shibuya, Fukuoka, Sapporo and Hokkaido, Nagoya, Kobe. I've interviewed a lot of the startup cities. So if you want to know about what the startup cities offers, I've interviewed all the major ones except for Osaka.
And yet you're here today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from your experience, is there any city in Japan, now that you brought it up, that is maybe more or easier, if that is, to start a company in, or is it kind of equally difficult?
I think it's difficult, but it's my thought is, even though I'm in Hokkaido, I would say probably Tokyo it's the most expensive, but it's the best. And the main reason for that is, I'll go into Osaka in a bit, but for Tokyo, just the amount of foreign founders, just the amount of people who've succeeded already, and where the venture capital is, like everything's in Tokyo. And when you do sales to corporations, so I have clients who are based in Osaka and other parts of Japan, and they have to come all the way to Tokyo to meet these big corporates in a lot of cases. And so I think Tokyo's the most expensive. I wouldn't say it's the easiest, but you have outside of, if money is not an issue, then come to Tokyo. If you need to be more careful with, let's say, your money, maybe a place like Sapporo or Fukuoka, where you can get rent cheaper, you can get good quality Japanese staff, or a good enough quality Japanese staff, and I would say decent access to foreigners. Probably Fukuoka more so than Sapporo, but that could work. And so I'd say, in terms of, I do want to compliment Kobe City. I found Kobe City the most pleasant to work with.
Interesting.
In terms of responded very quickly. We asked for help. Hey, could you promote our podcast on your page? I think they're probably the only city who did it. Everyone else turned us down. And just response speed. And I actually complimented Kobe. I'm like, wow, you guys respond so quickly and you guys are so pleasant to deal with. Like, why? I actually asked them why. And they said, startups, we have to operate at the speed of startups. And so I was like, excellent.
Seems like a city that might be on the map relatively soon, right? Because it's quite young in the startup space. I haven't really heard of people founding in Kobe.
Not Kobe, yeah, not so much. I would say Kobe, if you have a health tech related, anything related to healthcare, health tech, and I've talked to other health tech founders, and they said Kobe was the most proactive. So a lot of cities, they have something that they're focused on. They have kind of a specialty. So Sapporo, I would say it's more agriculture and space is the two areas they're focused on. So if you have agricultural product, Hokkaido could be Hokkaido is a good place to check out. Health tech, definitely Kobe is the most proactive. Fukuoka says fintech, but not I haven't heard of. Maybe it's my awareness, but I'm not sure if there's any really huge success cases in Fukuoka. And also, one of the 500 global clients, I think with Shizuoka, and they offered him free, kind of like a small warehouse.
Wow.
And so it kind of, I would say there's no right answer for what's the best startup city. It's you would have to listen to all the podcast episodes or ask me directly.
Based on what you want to do, there might be a better fit for you. But generally, a lot of the money is in Tokyo. And you also mentioned the importance of network. Basically, a lot of successful founders already there, a lot of people that may help you, guide you, and clients, of course.
And I think Nagoya might have potentially, or Aichi Nagoya might be the most successful at this, maybe. But they made a collaboration with SoftBank to make a station AI to help AI startups. And I think that one seems very promising. But I'll say in general, all the startup cities, I think they're pretty weak at making introductions to corporations. So what I mean by that is they're very helpful in getting you setting up a company. Some of them provide nice subsidies. I think Hokkaido might provide up to 10 or 1 or 2 million yen. So that's a pretty good chunk of money to help you get established. I think Fukuoka gives something similar, or they might pay half the salary for one employee or half the rent. So they offer pretty nice subsidies, but what the companies really need is sales.
So back to the main problem of getting your first clients.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, what you do, that's going to be the number one goal for you to get going.
The startup cities may not like me for saying this, but I don't think any of them have cracked the code for the most important thing, which is getting them their first sales, getting them established. So I think there's companies that maybe got a startup visa and maybe weren't able to renew. So the startup visa, you have to renew it, I think, after 6 months up to 1 year. And some companies don't renew or don't get renewed because they didn't get enough traction. And so I think it's one thing that for the listeners, for me saying, and hopefully this doesn't come to bite me with, let's say, startup cities being angry at me, but it's they might present a rosier pitch or a more pleasant pitch, or easier than it seems, because the subsidies they give are actually really nice, but what you really need is sales, and getting that first client is the hardest part.
Be prepared and do some of your own research. Don't kind of rely fully on the cities to get you going, basically, is the takeaway here.
It's the cities are there to support you, which is the reason why they use the term, let's say, startup support city. So it's so I think sometimes I don't think the cities are good enough at communicating that, how hard it's going to be. And so I think also founders, they don't understand the word of startup support city. And so I think so that's one thing to clarify. So on the city's end, it's of course, they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot saying that, it's going to be really, 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 really hard. You got to do all the hard work yourself. We're just here to support you a little bit. And on the other end, but the city can also say, like, we said we're a startup support. It doesn't mean we're the main.
Yeah, you still got to do the work yourself, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And so I guess that's kind of some things I help with companies. Just rather than researching things yourself, I know a lot of people already. You can just have a 1-2 hour consultation session with me. These are the people you need to reach out to. Some cases I can make the introduction. Some cases it's hard to, but just kind of really guiding them and just really preparing them. Like, this is how hard it's gonna be, and if the use case makes sense, I think you should try. If not, probably not. Not now.
You've been here for over a decade and came for 2 years and ended up founding 3 companies. Have seen a lot of change in the startup sphere in Japan. Now looking back, do you feel like generally your perception on Japan as a country for entrepreneurs has changed too?
So I've been an entrepreneur for maybe 9 years, but I would say it's still really, really tough. I got lucky in the sense that I was scouted by 2 Japanese founders who really needed my skill set. But I think if I was at the same age, I think there's a lot more opportunities now. Back then there was no startup visa. You pretty much needed 5 million yen just to sponsor yourself with a business manager visa. So, Fukuoka coming up with that startup visa was a huge, innovation for startups. Also, I put, on my website, scalingyourcompany.com, we've created an investor list, or I guess codename is Foreign Friendly Investor List. We made a list of investors who have already invested in a company with a foreign founder. And I think our list is up to 60 investors.
So it's growing. There's much more choice than before, maybe, if you're looking for funding for your ideas.
Yes. And so, but some people may say so I'll say if you're someone who has domain expertise, you're a foreigner, you've been in Japan 5-10 years, let's say the health tech industry well, or my case, the education industry well. It's there's probably the software here isn't as advanced as those in the US. And so if you have that kind of network and you already know some corporates through that you've met while working at another company, I think you're what probably would say is a strong founder. But if you don't have that connections, you don't have 5-10 years of experience in one domain, you're not an expert. Maybe you're not fluent in Japanese. You have all these X's against you. So I think one thing that I think newer entrepreneurs are misunderstand is that, I would say, so Japanese ability, if you have N1, N2, that's one rocket booster and you're fighting gravity. You have 5 to 10 years experience in this domain. That's another rocket booster. Then you have a network, some people who can make decisions, purchasing decisions. So one of my clients is in the cloud space, has been in Japan for I think around 8 years, can speak Japanese, knows cloud infrastructure very well. He's going to succeed, or very high probability of success, therefore higher probability of success. Therefore, venture capitalists will take him more seriously, or corporations will take him more seriously because that person gets them. But if you have the triangle of rocket boosters helping you to fight gravity, your chances are much higher to, escape that ozone layer or whatever, to escape velocity. But if you only have one rocket booster, it's
you're gonna come crashing back down.
Yeah, or you need a lot of fuel maybe.
So starting a company in Japan is basically like getting on a rocket and fighting gravity.
Exactly. And sometimes but I think I did hear about the Zen group's case where they started in university, but it was a group of 3-4 friends. So maybe that might be an extra rocket booster, like just all that manpower.
When listening to their stories also, you will see that it helped a lot that they were 4 in the end. A challenge in some situations, but a huge advantage in others.
Yeah, and for me too, like actually venture capitalists don't like one-person startups.
They want a team.
Yeah, who complement. In my case, we had a perfect trio. One was marketing. One was really about, let's say, kind of like franchising, but helping franchising, like scaling franchises. In my case, like everything to do with foreigners, I've already done it, and coming up with like the teaching style as well, the service. And so like it's just a perfect. And that is a triangle, was one person to get the customers, one person to get the interior, negotiate all the rent, dealing with the Japanese customers, and myself dealing with the foreigners. And so that's why I think we've beat a lot of our competitors and people who copied our business model. We were able to beat them just because the team is so strong. So my thought is for new entrepreneurs, I highly recommend it. It's changed my life. Right now I'm from Hawaii. I can go to Hawaii for 1 month. I can go to a different country for several months. And I'm not location based anymore. I can live anywhere and do my work. And I'm free. Flew down to Osaka. I'm here for 2 days. I didn't have to ask anybody.
You set your own schedule.
Exactly.
You kind of reached the goal of many entrepreneurs have with their companies.
So I've achieved freedom. And so I might have said some things here that are a little bit controversial, or let's say may not please some people in the PR departments, but let's say I'm free.
Tyson, we covered a lot of topics, from how you got started with OneCoin English, Japan switch, scaling your company, and kind of your experience with basically startups in Japan, whether they are founded here, whether they are imported from overseas, good places to start. Do you have any final maybe advice or something that you'd like to share that you think is important for listeners that may be interested in starting a company or who are already in the process?
Yeah, it's one tip would be to reduce founder entitlement. Meaning expecting people to kind of like, because you're founder, like you work so hard that people just, they owe you something. I think that's one thing to kind of let go of. There's a bit of founder entitlement. And I understand because it's hard to create a company. You put your blood, sweat, and tears, your savings. But I think if you approach it that no one owes you anything, I think that will help you to come up with making your service or making yourself much better. Because if you're just resentful or like other people owe you stuff, that stops, the creativity in your mind. Like, how can you really create something awesome? If people aren't getting there, maybe it's your fault. Maybe you didn't communicate it enough. And so if you approach many things of it being your fault, even when it might kind of be your fault, I think it helps you become more creative, and then you'll try to solve it rather than depending on others. The second one is, I do think there's a lot of cool things happening. So like in Osaka, I think, you had ASA, and they created something called Starter Guild. And
we talked to Dwayne last
Dwayne as
week.
Well.
He was here. So.
Cool. So ASA and Dwayne has done a good job of us scaling, or really making effort into the Osaka ecosystem. Because for me, dealing with Osaka for the podcast, it was a real thumbs down experience. They said,
Osaka as a city.
I've contacted multiple departments, asked, hey, I want to interview Osaka, I want to promote Osaka. Only city in Japan.
That turned you down.
That turned me down.
So there's work to be done here in Osaka.
So I'm not sure if they've had negative experiences, but I'm just saying that just like let's say I love Osaka. I've lived in Nara for 5 years. I went to Japanese school very close to here for 1 year. I used to speak Kansai Ben, and this is actually my favorite place in Japan, and I was very disappointed. But so there's that initiative there, and Tokyo, there's a lot going on, and also like if you're a university student, there's I think a lot of community efforts too. I think it's like JVC or something, but there's a couple initiatives for Japanese and non-Japanese university students to get their feet wet in entrepreneurship and get started. So I think the resources is there. It's just one is, it's if just that business is a match for you or not, and finding what works for you. So it's compared to like 10 years ago, there's nothing.
So little by little, the startup ecosystem in Japan is also kind of coming to life. And the more founders try their hands at it, the more investors there'll be, the more collaborations there'll be. And maybe cities will get involved more as well. And we'll see kind of a fruitful collaboration of many bright ideas. And
so I think it's, I think when you talk to entrepreneurs, they're probably a bit dissatisfied with the level at the moment, but the cities are putting a lot of money into it. I think maybe like, the governor, they probably might not have enough governor support yet. I mean, I was in charge of Yokohama City. I saw what happened when you have a mayor the job that you do for the government matches their platform. So we got a mayor who was focused on education. It was brilliant, like just the energy. So I think there probably hasn't been like a mayor they're worrying about other things that isn't really startup. So I think for those who like criticize startup cities, it's usually not the people in the startup city's fault. Like they're very hardworking. Kobe, Sapporo, Nagoya, Aichi, Fukuoka, Tokyo, they're working hardcore. Like probably working too much actually, and because they care so much. But yeah, I think from the upper end, maybe it might still be too early to have someone who's like, so hopefully with Kishida Prime Minister having this big ambition, I forgot the number, but also Tokyo's putting a lot of money into it now. So I think it's probably it's the best time to start a company in terms of support. But the downside is now that there'll probably be more competition as well. So that's the downside. But
still, a lot of exciting projects are to come. And if some of them are looking for some advice or mentoring, they can always reach out to you. We'll make sure to have all the links in the description for up and coming founders or people that are already in the process and need some assistance.
Cool. And yeah, that's kind of been like myself, I came from a very poor area of Hawaii. Most like 10% of my graduating class went to university. So for me, education is very important. And so in my case, probably many people can't afford my services for one-on-one attention. That's why I've created the podcast. We've created like 80 blog posts on business. Like we've created free information for those who want to get started but might not have the financial means. Also, if you want to learn Japanese, I got N1, or I got to N2 through self-study, then got N1 by going to a Japanese language school in Osaka. But I've put all my knowledge of how to study Japanese at japanswitch.com. I was HR director, hired hundreds, thousands of people. I put a lot of my HR knowledge, like how to network, how to interview, all that information, or attending a job fair at bfftokyo.com. So like all this knowledge I have, I made it accessible for foreigners because I wanted to pave the way for the next generation.
Thank you, Tyson, for your work, for coming here and sharing your experience about entrepreneurship in Japan. It was very interesting, and I hope that our listeners got some interest out of it as well. And we'll go check out the work you've put out there for everyone to find.
Sweet. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening and for watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.